Hi, my name is Jane Kim. I teach kindergarten at Lexington School for the Deaf, and I'm so excited to talk to you about the book, Oh My Gosh, Mrs. McNosh. Oh My Gosh, Mrs. McNosh follows the story of Mrs. Nellie McNosh and her dog, George. They go through the park on a stroll, and when George comes upon a squirrel, chaos breaks loose. And so it's a really funny story to read with kiddos as their laughter will follow along with the pages. You'll hear lots of giggles as you rhyme along with the adventures of Mrs. McNosh and her dog, George. Oh My Gosh, Mrs. McNosh is a great story to use with lessons on sequencing, right? So you can use it to have children sequence what's going to come next, what they can anticipate, what they can do with the context clues that are there and work on their prediction skills. It's also great for honing in on rhyming words. And one way you could use it is using the illustrations to help kids kind of get an idea of what might come next. You could say, Mrs. McNosh caught I wonder what comes next. I wonder if it was, A, B, or C. What rhymes with this word that we have already? An activity that would be great for this kind of book is to encourage kids to be their own authors and own illustrators. So they could really create their own version of Mrs. McNosh's adventure with George through the park and figure out their own rhyming pairs. If you really want to focus on the rhyming patterns, you could have them sort different items or different pictures that will help them to pick out rhyming pairs. They could also make a class book, right? Instead of having one student create a whole story of the whole adventure, how can we work with our partners? How can we work in small groups or teams? Or as a whole class to have this shared writing experience where we create a story where they go on an adventure and, you might want to hold on to one thing or one key theme that might be, okay, well, this is the setting and we have to stick to the setting, or we have a rhyming pattern and this is the rhyming pattern that we want to follow. So picking a theme and letting the children become their own authors and illustrators will spark a lot of creativity, but also practicing their skills for what they might need to pay attention to in future stories that are read aloud. I think Oh My Gosh, Mrs. McNosh could also be used for discussions on kind of our social emotional learning, how we're feeling. You can talk about the emotions of Mrs. McNosh and just kind of the ups and downs she goes through as she's chasing after George. And when you get to the end of the story, that could also be a lesson on how sometimes we think things are going to turn out a certain way, and sometimes we could be disappointed, and sometimes we could be pleasantly surprised. And so I think there's a lot of social emotional learning that can happen. So being able to talk about our emotions, our expectations, and what actually happens, that's, kind of part of life. And I think it's a really relatable area that all learners can really connect to. Oh My Gosh, Mrs. McNosh is a great story to practice our skills in sequencing, in storytelling, in predictions. Really is so much that you can do with this book. The possibilities are endless. So I really encourage you to add it to your classroom library and really enjoy the giggles that come with reading the story, Oh My Gosh, Mrs. McNosh.